Hey guys, tonight we step into a world of powdered wigs, political paranoia, and royal charm so slick it could slip on its own legacy. You're not a mere noble or knight tonight. You're the future Charles II. And before you start imagining velvet robes and flute music, let me stop you. This is not a fairy tale. This is the story of a boy king-to-be, born into fire, destined to lose a father, a crown, and several dozen nights of sleep. You wake up in St. James's Palace to the sound of arguments, again. The air smells like beeswax, soot, and tension. Your nurse whispers that your father, King Charles I, has upset the people again. Something about money, or religion, or both. You're 8. You don't understand taxes. You do understand that your home has guards who don't smile anymore. You're given lessons in Latin, swordplay, and how to act like you'll rule one day. But what they don't teach you is how to survive a civil war. Mainstream historical fact: Charles II was born in 1630, just a dozen years before England collapsed into the English Civil War. His father's conflicts with Parliament led to a series of bloody uprisings between royalists, supporting the king, and parliamentarians, supporting, well, less king. You're 11 when Parliament declares war on your dad. You're 14 when you ride alongside him in battle. At first it's exciting, like playing knight for real. But then the cannon fire starts. Then the horses bleed. Then the men start dying with your family crest on their chest. Historians still argue whether Charles I's stubbornness or Parliament's aggression truly lit the match. But either way, it burns everything. One day you hear your father lost again. Then again. And then silence. You're told not to ask questions. Then comes the day no prince is prepared for. January 30th, 1649. You are not in London. You are not allowed to watch. But you will remember this date forever. Your father is executed. Executed. Not assassinated. Not murdered in some shadowy alley.
No, officially executed.
Trial. Sentence. Block. Applause. Quirky tidbit. Charles I wore 2 shirts on the day of his execution to avoid shivering from cold. He didn't want anyone to think he was afraid. Royal dignity, still a thing even when you're about to lose your head. Your mother weeps. Your tutors pack. You are no longer prince. You are now exiled. At 18, you're officially the King of England. Kind of. Sort of. Not really. Scotland declares you king first. The coronation there is cold and Protestant and awkward. You say the words. You try to look brave. But you know the truth. Without an army, without allies, without your own country, you're a king with no throne and no power. Then Cromwell happens. Oliver Cromwell is the human equivalent of a gray winter. Stern. Unforgiving. Not a single Whig in sight. He names himself Lord Protector and starts remaking England in the image of a puritanical fever dream. Alehouses close. Theaters shut down. Dancing is suspicious. Laughing? Best done in private. You, meanwhile, are sleeping on borrowed beds in foreign courts. France. The Netherlands. Even Spain at one point. You're charming, yes. Fluent in flattery. But you are always aware. You are a guest. Political pawn. A royal refugee. Sometimes you play tennis with bored nobles. Sometimes you write desperate letters for money. Once, you have to sell your last pair of good boots just to get across a border. You miss your dog. You miss your country. You miss the idea of being wanted. But even in exile, you cultivate something vital, your wit. You listen. You learn. You adapt. Historians still argue whether Charles's years abroad made him more cunning or just more desperate. Some say he became a political chameleon. Others say he simply learned to survive by smiling wider than his enemies. You keep smiling. One night, someone toasts to the true King of England. You smile again, but inside you swear you'll return. Someday, even if the throne is made of ashes. You're 21, a royal on the run, and your boots haven't dried in 3 days. Cromwell has crushed the Scottish army at Worcester. Your plan to reclaim England ended in a soggy mess of blood, mud, and betrayal. Your crown is now worth less than your head. And guess what? That head is carrying a price tag. You duck into an oak tree. Yes, an actual oak tree. You press yourself into its branches and hope the soldiers below don't look up. You hold your breath. You pray. You reconsider every life choice that led you to hiding like a squirrel in royal lace. This is not a prince's life. This is a manhunt. Mainstream historical fact. After the Battle of Worcester in 1651, Charles II fled for his life. He famously hid in the royal oak tree at Boscobel House while Cromwell's troops searched the area. He traveled over 600 miles in disguise, trying to evade capture. You dress as a servant. You speak like a peasant. You ride horses badly on purpose. You even cut your luxurious royal locks to look more plow-worthy. At one inn, someone says you look familiar. You cough, nod vaguely, and invent a name. Will Jackson. Not exactly regal, but hey, it gets you fed. Fringe tidbit. During his escape, Charles disguised himself as a woodsman and had to chop firewood to sell the act. Unfortunately, he was terrible at it. His guide once said His Majesty never struck a true blow in his life. You sleep in barns. You step in manure. You learn to smile without showing teeth because your gums are bleeding from a lack of real food. At one point, you share a bed with a stranger and pray they don't roll over and recognize you as England's most wanted man. Each day, Cromwell's bounty grows. You are worth £1,000 dead or alive. That's enough money to buy a small estate or a lot of beer. You develop a sense of humor about it. Sort of. You call it the adventure. Your allies call it madness. One loyal royalist whispers, "If you're caught, it's over. For you and the cause." Historians still argue whether Charles's escape was miraculous or just lucky. Some claim divine intervention. Others say Cromwell's men were simply bad at their job. Either way, you make it out. Eventually, a boat waits for you. You step aboard. You leave your kingdom behind again. When the English coastline vanishes behind mist and sea spray, you're quiet. You're cold. And you're determined. You swear to yourself, next time you'll return not as a fugitive but as a monarch. But first, you need to survive long enough to grow a better beard. Europe takes you back. Sort of.
France no politely.
The Dutch hand you stale bread. Even the Spanish roll their eyes. You become the royal equivalent of couch surfing. You show up to balls underdressed, outfunded, and overcharming. Sometimes people ask what you do if you got the throne back. You grin. You say, "Open the theaters, kiss the ladies, and tax the rich." They laugh. You don't, because you know you mean it. Late one night, you write to your mother. You tell her you're safe. You don't tell her your shoes are still damp from 3 weeks ago. She writes back, "God has plans for you." You hope those plans involve dry socks. One day, you hear rumors. Cromwell's getting older. The Puritans are fighting among themselves. England is growing tired of gray skies, gray laws, and gray moralists. The country, it seems, misses joy, and wigs, and fun. Historians still argue whether Charles's charm alone kept the monarchy's hope alive, or if the sheer misery of Puritan rule created the perfect craving for anyone more colorful. So you wait, you watch, and you learn how to stay alive by doing what you've done best since the day your dad lost his head. You smile like it doesn't hurt. You're 30 now, and England is groaning under the weight of too many rules and too little fun. The Puritans have outlawed nearly everything with rhythm or flavor.
No dancing.
No theater. No Christmas. That's right, no Christmas. Even the bakers are grumpy. Oliver Cromwell is dead. His son, Richard Cromwell, is trying to keep the grey train running. But let's just say, Dick doesn't quite stick the landing. He's less Lord Protector and more awkward substitute teacher. Whispers reach you across the channel. Whispers of nostalgia, of royalists emboldened, of taverns quietly raising glasses to the return of the king. Mainstream historical fact. In 1660, following a collapse of confidence in the Commonwealth and growing unrest, Parliament invited Charles II to return as king in what became known as the Restoration. You don't believe it at first. Then a letter arrives. Then another. Then a very official-looking delegation knocks on your borrowed door. They want you back. You blink. You nod. You ask someone if this is a prank. And then, on May 29th, 1660, your 30th birthday, no less, you sail back to England. But this time, not in disguise, not with wet boots. This time, your sails are filled with celebration. The Thames is lined with boats. People weep, cheer, faint. Women toss petals. Men wave flags. Even the dogs bark more enthusiastically. You are home. They call you the Merry Monarch. You smile. You wink. You raise a hand and vow not to be your father, stoic and doomed, but something else entirely. A survivor in silk. Quirky tidbit. On his return to London, Charles II was offered gifts of pineapples, which had just arrived from the Caribbean. He hated the taste, but loved the novelty and ordered dozens to be painted into portraits of royal grandeur. You waste no time. You reopen the theaters. You restore Christmas. You fill the court with music and laughter and mistresses and ministers in equal measure. And suddenly, everyone wants something from you. Positions, titles, pardons, a moment of your time, a taste of your wine. The Restoration is less a royal victory than a balancing act, juggling Parliament's expectations, old grudges, new allies, and your own craving for joy. Historians still argue whether Charles's easygoing charm masked a calculating political mind or if he simply relied on luck and likability. Either way, you know how to keep people smiling, even if it means laughing while the ceiling leaks. Speaking of which, the Palace of Whitehall is in disrepair. One chamber smells like mold and betrayal. You send for renovations. You get distracted. You move to Hampton Court instead. Meanwhile, you're forming a cabinet. Not because you love paperwork, but because you'd rather delegate the details while you enjoy a private concert by candlelight. You surround yourself with characters, poets, mistresses, scientists, fools. One day it's Isaac Newton sketching optics in the corner. The next it's Nell Gwynn making jokes about your legs in front of foreign ambassadors. You let it all happen, because you know your power is not in fear, it's in fun. You are not a warrior king. You are not a philosopher king. You are a party. Still, the shadows remain. Old parliamentarians plot in pubs. Puritans pray for your downfall. And your own court whispers, wonders, and occasionally poisons someone just to keep things interesting. But you raise your glass. You toast to England. You toast to second chances. You toast to being the kind of king who knows how to survive not just battle, but boredom. And for now, that's enough. The Restoration, it turns out, isn't just banquets and bunting. It's also plague. Glorious, horrifying, city-choking plague. You wake one morning to find your physicians unusually silent, your courtiers unusually pale, and your city, your glorious, chaotic London, flickering with more lanterns than usual. Not for festivity, for fear. It starts in the rat-infested alleys. Then it spreads like spilled wine, across docks, through tenements, into churches, taverns, and manor houses alike. Mainstream historical fact: the Great Plague of 1665 killed an estimated 100,000 people, almost a quarter of London's population. It was the last major outbreak of bubonic plague in England. You ride out with your court not nobly but strategically to Oxford. You leave the capital in the hands of your city officials and a few very brave clergymen. You don't even pretend to be brave. You're not foolish. You've seen what the disease does, but you still read the reports. You still ask how many were buried that week. You still write letters to mayors, bishops, even grieving children. You just do it from far enough away that your wig doesn't catch the fleas. Quirky tidbit: some believe the plague could be warded off by carrying a pomander, a hollow orb filled with herbs and perfumes. You had yours custom-made in gold, with a miniature portrait of your spaniel inside, sentimental and sanitary. Meanwhile, the capital decays. The streets, usually thick with gossip and horse dung, now run quieter than a Puritan hymn. Doors are painted with red crosses. Whole families vanish. Gravediggers work by torchlight. Doctors, though still alive, stuff their noses with lavender and mutter Latin like it's armor. And you, though safe, cannot ignore it. Every decision you make carries the weight of the city's breathless silence. Historians still argue whether your flight from London was cowardice or common sense. You're not here for that debate. You're too busy trying to keep the country from unraveling entirely. When you return, the stench still clings to the stones. But the worst is not over, because just as London begins to breathe again, just as people begin to leave their homes without crossing themselves, it burns. September 1666. A bakery, a spark, and then hell. The Great Fire of London. Flames leap from rooftop to rooftop like drunken dancers. Wind howls. People scream, shove, sob. You stand at a distance, atop a borrowed horse, and you watch your city vanish into smoke. Mainstream historical fact: the fire destroyed over 13,000 homes, 87 parish churches, and numerous civic buildings including St. Paul's Cathedral. Remarkably, fewer than 10 people were officially recorded as dying, though the real toll is still debated. You ride toward the inferno not to play hero, but because you can't not. You organize fire breaks. You offer coin to anyone who helps. You shout over the crackle of burning timber and the collapse of ceilings. One witness swears you carried buckets yourself. Another says you just pointed a lot. Both are probably true. Quirky detail: you ordered the demolition of entire streets to stop the fire's spread, sometimes using gunpowder. Let it never be said you lacked flair for the dramatic. In the days after, London is a charred skeleton. Smoke clings to everything: cloaks, prayers, memories. And in this ruin, your people turn to you, not because you're flawless, but because you're there. Historians still argue whether the fire saved London by forcing it to rebuild better. You only know this. From this blackened earth, a new city will rise. You issue plans. You consult architects. You imagine spires, stone, symmetry. You want wide boulevards where fire can't leap, and marketplaces that won't choke in plague. You rebuild, and you smile, not because it's easy, but because survival, yours, the cities, is an art. And you're becoming quite the master. You're back in Whitehall now, but the palace feels different. Not because the bricks have changed, but because you have. The city you rule smells of ashes and gingerbread in equal measure. London has this way of mourning with one hand and tossing confetti with the other. And speaking of confetti, let's talk about your court. The Restoration Court is not your father's court.
No dur lectures.
No psalms before breakfast. This is a carnival in silk stockings, a soap opera with powdered wigs. You, Charles II, are the ringleader and your audience never leaves. Mainstream historical fact: Charles II's court became infamous for its extravagance, wit, and the presence of actresses and mistresses. It marked a sharp cultural shift from the puritanical austerity of the Commonwealth period. You bring back the theater. Real theater. Women on stage, gasps in the aisles, and jokes about chamber pots that somehow still feel classy. People come to see Shakespeare, sure, but they stay for the cleavage and scandal. You attend every show, sometimes in disguise, sometimes not. One night, you toss a coin at an actress mid-soliloquy. She throws a wink back like a dagger. Her name is Nell Gwynn. Quirky tidbit: Nell once sold oranges in the theater aisles before becoming the king's mistress. She called you her Charles III, after the two previous men in her life, both also named Charles. You adore her, but then again you adore many. Barbara Palmer, the Duchess of Cleveland, brilliant, vicious, and about as subtle as a flaming chariot. Louise de Keroualle, French, delicate, and reportedly fluent in double entendres. Mal Davis, sings like a nightingale, eats like a lion. Your bed is not exactly lonely. Neither is your breakfast table. Historians still argue whether your harem of mistresses was a political liability or a masterstroke of distraction. All you know is this: if governing means enduring endless budget reports, you might as well enjoy a little musical comedy on the side. Of course, this merry monarch persona isn't just for fun. It's your armor, your distraction. While Parliament groans about taxes, while Protestants scream about Catholics, while the Dutch light their cannons and the French count their gold, you laugh, because a laughing king is harder to stab. Still, not everything is a jest. There are tensions in your soul you don't speak of, regrets about your brother James and his increasingly Catholic leanings, worries about heirs. You have many children, just none with your wife. and beneath it all, a quiet dread. What if all this joy is just the overture to a darker reprise? You take long walks in St. James's Park, feed the ducks, write poetry, badly, watch your spaniels fight over goose bones. You talk to your astrologer. You listen to your astronomer. You weigh the stars and Parliament in equal measure. Quirky detail, you founded the Royal Society, where geniuses like Isaac Newton and Robert Hooke squabble about gravity and glass lenses. You fund their odd experiments because, deep down, you like knowing there's more to the universe than court gossip and powdered wigs. And yet, when the bell tolls for another budget session, you sigh, pat your dog, and return to the throne room. Because being king isn't about ruling perfectly. It's about staying alive long enough to rule again tomorrow. You do that with charm, with caution, and yes, with a good deal of cake. You sit on your throne, but it might as well be a seesaw. On one side, Parliament. On the other, your family, your faith, your secrets. You try to balance, but every motion tilts the game. Let's talk about your brother, James. James, Duke of York, your heir presumptive, your war-seasoned sibling, your, how do we put this? Problem. Because while England tolerates many things, your women, your debts, even your taste in wig powder, what it does not tolerate is a Catholic king. Mainstream historical fact, James's open Catholicism caused political unrest in Protestant England and eventually triggered the exclusion crisis, a campaign to bar him from inheriting the throne. And here's the twist, you kind of agree. Not because you hate Catholics. You're more spiritual gumbo than doctrinal roast beef. But you know the people. The mob doesn't chant Latin, they chant fear. You try to soften it. You give vague speeches. You nod ambiguously. You invent a new art, smiling while doing nothing. Historians still argue whether your refusal to exile James was loyalty, laziness, or political genius. You're not telling. Meanwhile, Parliament sharpens its pens. The exclusion bill is drafted. You read it while petting your spaniel. The dog growls. You nod. Exactly, you say. Quirky tidbit. During debates, you sometimes sneak into the House of Lords and sit behind a curtain just to listen. It's like reality TV, but with powdered wigs and Latin footnotes. You try compromises. You offer safeguards. You promise not to drop James onto the throne without a Protestant parachute. Nobody believes you. The people chant, "No popery." They burn effigies of the Pope. They even burn ones of James, though someone tries to give him a flattering jawline. And still, you resist signing the exclusion bill. Because if you do it once, exclude a royal for belief, what's next? Exclude you for being too merry? So you dissolve Parliament. Then another. Then another. Like peeling back onions until no one's crying anymore. Just confused and vaguely hungry. You govern without it for 4 solid years. And it's kind of peaceful.
No shouting. No bills.
Just you, your court, and a very clear desk. Quirky royal memo. You once wrote a speech threatening to quit the throne entirely if pushed further on exclusion. Historians call it dramatic. You call it Friday. But the cost of this peace? Oh, it adds up. Your enemies multiply. Your health trembles. Your people, once dazzled by restoration glitter, start squinting and seeing cracks in the gold leaf. Still, you press forward. You build observatories. You fund cartographers. You keep the arts humming like a lute played by a ghost. Because while they debate James, while they wave placards and roast sausages over bonfires of paranoia, you reign. Not with fire, but with velvet. It starts with smoke. Thick, sour, and slow-moving like a guilty rumor. You're awoken in your chamber, not by a trumpet, not by an assassin, but by fire. London is burning. Mainstream historical fact. The Great Fire of London began on September 2nd, 1666, in a bakery on Pudding Lane and destroyed over 13,000 houses, 87 churches, and the original St. Paul's Cathedral. You're barely dressed, your curls half-pinned, when you stagger out to the balcony and see the sky already lit like Judgment Day. The air smells like roasted timber and singed wool. You're not sure if someone's screaming or singing hymns. It's that kind of night. And all anyone wants to know is, what are you going to do, Your Majesty? You act. Fast. faster than they expected from the merry monarch. You order the demolition of buildings to make fire breaks. You ride into the thick of it. You get soot on your boots, ash in your teeth. One man offers you a half-burnt turnip. You eat it, out of solidarity or hunger. Even you can't tell. Quirky tidbit. You and your brother James actually took part in organizing bucket chains and fire suppression. Witnesses described you both in plain shirts, passing water along like common men. But the rumors still spread faster than flames. It's the Catholics. No, it's the Dutch. Or the French. Or your mistresses. Or your French Catholic mistresses. A pigeon is found dead near a statue and someone blames the Pope. Historians still argue whether this fire was a divine punishment or just a bakery accident wrapped in tinfoil theology. Meanwhile, you're pacing through the ruins. Imagine. St. Paul's collapsed, London Bridge scorched, half the city smoking like a pipe in a tavern. And yet, no royal palace was destroyed. Some say it was God protecting the monarchy. Others say you were just lucky. You let them argue. It's easier than explaining probability. You commission rebuilding plans. Wren's dome is on your mind. Cobblestones, symmetry, grandeur. But you know deep down it's not just about brick. It's about control. Because while the fire raised London's skyline, it also burned through political loyalties. You emerge from the ashes not weaker, but strangely, grimly stronger. Parliament doesn't quite trust you. The people don't quite hate you. And everyone is exhausted. So you do what any seasoned monarch does after catastrophe. Throw a spectacular distraction. Plays return. Fireworks erupt. You declare days of fasting, then days of feasting. Mourning turns into masquerades. A woman wears a charred chandelier as a hat. You award her a pension. You've understood something. In England, misery must wear rouge. So you build. You joke. You grieve. You rebuild again. And through it all, London learns to walk with a limp and a smirk. Just like you. You survive fire, but the air isn't done with you yet. Now it carries something invisible, and far more cruel than flame. The plague. Mainstream historical fact. The Great Plague of 1665 was the last major outbreak of bubonic plague in England, killing around 100,000 people in London alone, nearly a quarter of the city's population. It begins in the poorer parishes, as these things always do. A swollen lymph node here, a dark blotch there, a fever that spirals into oblivion before sunrise. You're told the rats are the problem. No, it's the fleas. No, it's sin. The theories multiply faster than the corpses. Historians still argue whether flea-ridden rats were the main culprit, or whether poor sanitation, overpopulation, and the hot summer of 1665 played larger roles. You retreat reluctantly to Oxford. The court follows you like a herd of perfume-drenched shadows. But your mind stays in London, where carts roll through cobbled streets each dawn, collecting the dead beneath pale dawn skies. You send funds. You write letters. You pray. Privately, of course. Publicly, you issue orders in your best calligraphy and hope your subjects notice the royal seal instead of the growing panic in the margins. Your mistresses are nervous. The queen wears herbs in her sleeves. You take to bathing in rosewater and vinegar, as if that can somehow banish airborne death. Quirky tidbit. One of your personal physicians recommends cutting a pigeon in half and applying it to the sores. You decline. The pigeon does not object. The streets of London go quiet. Not peacefully quiet, but eerily so, like the breath before a scream. The theaters close. The bells toll constantly. Dogs wander masterless. Children draw chalk crosses on their own doors. You send for reports daily, then hourly. Every ink-stained page smells faintly of smoke and fear. You read names you once toasted, now crossed out by plague. You miss laughter. You miss noise. You even miss Parliament shouting at you about your brother. So you do what you always do, you entertain. Private masks in candlelit halls. Courtiers in masks, not for drama, but for disease. You find solace in music, in comedy, in wine. Because what else do you have? Your court becomes a cocoon of scented handkerchiefs, hopeful astrology, and carefully polished boots. ready to flee at the first sneeze. Yet you stay longer than anyone expects. Your critics say it's because you're too stubborn. Your supporters say it's because you care. The truth? You're tired of running. Remember when you darted from Cromwell across the heather, hiding in priest holes and oaks? This is worse, because now the enemy wears no uniform. It doesn't knock, coughs, and no witty remark can charm it. You walk your garden paths at twilight, wrapped in a cloak heavy with embroidered lions. You look at the stars and wonder which god you forgot to thank, or which one is holding a grudge. You try not to notice the silence, but even the birds seem to hold their breath. The bells have finally quieted. The smoke has faded. The rats have scurried back into the margins. And just when you think England might finally give you a break, you discover a conspiracy, a real one this time. Mainstream historical fact: the Popish plot of 1678 was a fictitious Catholic conspiracy fabricated by Titus Oates, claiming that Jesuits were planning to assassinate King Charles II and place his Catholic brother James on the throne. Titus Oates is not a particularly impressive man. He walks like a forgotten marionette and speaks like a Bible was swallowed by a bar brawl. But people listen, because fear is loud, and Oates has a megaphone of paranoia. He claims there's a grand Catholic scheme to murder you, that Jesuits are tunneling beneath Whitehall with poison daggers and Latin curses, that your food is laced, that your bed is rigged. Quirky tidbit: Oates once claimed he overheard an assassination plot while hiding behind a curtain. No one asked why he was behind the curtain. You investigate, of course. You're not that merry. You know England's memory is short, and its mob is long. So you pretend to believe just enough. You allow Parliament to froth, magistrates to panic, and random Catholics to be arrested with far more enthusiasm than evidence. And then the executions begin. Priests, scholars, innocents. Some whisper your name as the axe falls. Others pray for your soul. You try not to look down. Historians still argue whether you were complicit in the plot's consequences or simply overwhelmed by political winds too sharp to redirect. You suspect both are true. It doesn't help that your brother James is doing his very best to confirm everyone's worst fears. He attends Massachusetts. He hires Catholic tutors for his daughters. He radiates future theocratic monarchy energy like it's cologne. You ask him to tone it down. He replies in Latin. Meanwhile, Oates becomes a celebrity. He parades through town like a prophet. Children sing songs about his visions. One baker names a pie after him. You consider arresting him, but then what? Let the people see the man they trusted. Let them realize the emperor has no theology. Eventually, the frenzy burns out, as all fires do, but not before dozens are dead. And the kingdom feels colder, not because of weather, but because now everyone is watching everyone else. Servants spy on masters. Neighbors whisper at wells. You can feel the weight of suspicion press behind every bow. You didn't start this paranoia, but you didn't stop it either. And in the quiet hours, after the jesters have gone home and the candlelight flickers low, you wonder if the crown is still on your head, or if it's just fear balancing there instead. You'd think by now they'd be used to your scandals. But oh no, there's always one more mistress, one more eyebrow-raising title, one more royal child who absolutely shouldn't be royal but kind of is. Mainstream historical fact: King Charles II fathered at least 12 illegitimate children with various mistresses, though he had no legitimate heirs with Queen Catherine of Braganza. You glance at your family tree, or rather your family orchard. It sprawls, tangles. It flowers in places that Parliament would prefer remained bare. There's the Duke of Monmouth. Handsome, Protestant, and very popular. Too popular. You love him truly, but you're not stupid. Give him too much favor, and the throne you've barely secured becomes a suggestion. Then there's Nell Gwyn, actress, wit, national treasure, possibly the only woman who ever made you laugh hard enough to spit wine across a goblet. Once, she was mistaken for a Catholic lover in public and shouted, "I'm the Protestant whore." The crowd cheered. You gave her another house. Quirky tidbit: Nell Gwyn once stole oranges from the royal kitchens to sell at her theater, years before she met you. You pretended not to remember when she told you over breakfast. And let's not forget Barbara Palmer. Fierce, volcanic, less a mistress, more a royal tempest in heels. You gave her husband a peerage just to soften the scandal of keeping her around. You might have loved her, or feared her. The line was always blurred. Historians still argue whether your long string of lovers reflected political strategy, emotional longing, or simple hedonism. But here's the real joke. England loved your scandals. They told jokes about them in pubs, wrote plays that winked at court. Even Puritans found themselves oddly invested in your romantic resume. You humanized the monarchy not with policy but with gossip. You turn a kingdom of suspicion into a nation of spectators. Everyone's watching you, but not with knives, with popcorn. Still, the Queen suffers quietly. Catherine of Braganza is devout, patient, endlessly kind, and chronically childless. You tried, she tried, but fate or God or some poorly aimed sperm refused. You never divorce her. That would have meant war with Portugal and worse, more shouting in Parliament. Instead, you dine with her, pray beside her, and take your lovers elsewhere. Sometimes you feel guilty. Sometimes you remember your king. Usually you just feel tired, because for all your charisma, your kingdom remains fragile. A monarchy rebuilt with spit and satin. One civil war behind you, another whispering ahead. So you keep everyone laughing. You host masquerades, tilt at tennis, walk your spaniels in the garden. You juggle chaos like it's court entertainment. And all the while you wonder, if you had a legitimate son, would they love him the way they love you? Or would they see through him too soon? Because charm can hide anything, except emptiness. You dream sometimes of being ordinary, just a man with muddy boots, a warm hearth, and someone to grow old beside who isn't secretly tallying your titles in her head. But then you wake up in Whitehall Palace, where even your dreams wear wigs. Mainstream historical fact: Whitehall Palace was the main residence of English monarchs from 1530 until it was destroyed by fire in 1698. During Charles II's reign, it was a sprawling, chaotic maze of over 1,500 rooms. You try to take a walk one morning, just a walk, but within 5 minutes you're ambushed by 3 dukes, 2 playwrights, and a small Italian man offering a mechanical duck. You accept the duck. It's the most honest creature you've met in a week. Inside Whitehall, the halls echo with whispered flattery and over-perfumed secrets. You can barely breathe without someone curtsying or asking for a cousin's promotion. One time, you fake a limp just to avoid another ambassador with opinions on Dutch trade. The palace itself is a labyrinth. Rooms built onto rooms. Staircases that lead to fireplaces. Entire hallways designed to confuse French envoys. There's one passage that smells like ham no matter what you do. You learn to stop asking. Quirky tidbit: your personal apartments include a wine fountain, a clock that plays music, and a miniature theater where dwarfs once performed Julius Caesar using oranges as props. Historians still argue whether the grandeur of Whitehall was meant to project power or distract from the crown's fragile finances. You suspect both. After all, a duke can't plot your downfall if he's still trying to find the exit to the dining room. Sometimes, you pause beneath a stained glass window, sunlight catching in the colored panes like holy gossip. You think about the kings who stood here before you. Henry VIII, Elizabeth, James, each more myth than man now. Will they say the same about you? You hope not. You'd prefer they remember your laughter, your impossible energy, the time you raced a courtier down the corridor because you were both too drunk to remember your titles. You were never just a king. You were the party after the plague, the sigh of relief, the king who knew the price of peace and paid in stories, not sermons. Still, sometimes, when you stare into the candle's flicker, the shadows tell you the truth, that this place is too big for one man, and too small for everything he carries. The world outside your palace changes faster than your wigs can keep up. Cities swell, streets tangle, and the stink of ambition rises like chimney smoke. London is no longer just recovering, it's ravenous. Mainstream historical fact: during Charles II's reign, London rapidly expanded in population and commerce. Rebuilding after the Great Fire, and becoming a center for science, trade, and colonial enterprise. You look out a palace window and see scaffolding, markets, and ships unloading strange goods from stranger lands. Silk, sugar, tobacco. Everything smells like someone else's labor. You sip your wine and think, somewhere, a stranger picked this with a shaking hand. You host scientists and thinkers, your Royal Society of London. Newton writes quietly in the corner, muttering about apples and gravity. Hooke sketches fleas with more detail than some artists devote to saints. You smile, fascinated and just a bit unnerved. These men speak in equations, not flattery. Quirky tidbit. You once attended an experiment where a dog was resuscitated using bellows and a curious metal tube. You clapped. The dog vomited. Science, it seems, is equal parts miracle and mess. Historians still argue whether your patronage of science was genuine curiosity or clever optics to distract from political instability. Truth be told, you're not even sure anymore. Maybe it started as a stunt. Maybe it ended as awe. You wander through a city pulsing with invention and desperation. The coffee houses buzz with rebellion dressed as debate. Pamphlets multiply like rats. Everyone has an opinion now, and most of them are printed. Your portraits hang in taverns and boudoirs alike. Some paint you as a libertine king, others as the laughing devil who saved England from dullness. Both are wrong, or right, or both. Because here's the thing, you know what you're doing. You encourage the noise. You let people joke about you. You let them debate. Because while they're arguing about whether your mistress is prettier than the last, they're not building barricades. That's your real genius. You are chaos-controlled. Still, in quieter moments, you wonder if you've built a kingdom or just distracted everyone from noticing it hasn't really been built at all. Because the poor are still poor. The wars still smolder. The plague is only ever one boat away. And yet, the laughter continues. You walk through your city, cloaked and unrecognized. A baker nods. A child sings a rhyme that ends with your name and a fart noise. You smile, because maybe legacy isn't carved in marble. Maybe it's shouted across a fish stall at dawn. You age in the way only kings do, slowly in portraits, suddenly in mirrors. The wig grows heavier, the wine less sweet, and the stares crueler than any parliament. Mainstream historical fact: Charles II died in 1685 at the age of 54, after a sudden illness. His final days were marked by seizures and failed medical interventions typical of the time. You feel it one morning, a tightness in your chest, a strange flicker behind your eyes, as though your body has grown tired of pretending you're immortal. But you say nothing. You joke. You toast. You dance, because what else is a king to do? The doctors swarm like flies on a royal banquet. They bleed you. They blister you. They dose you with powders that smell like betrayal and taste worse. They suggest urine inspection, leech therapy, and, just for fun, a heated silver spoon applied directly to your feet. Quirky tidbit. One of your physicians recommends powdered skull as a tonic. Another swears by pigeon dung applied to the soles. You allow both, because you're too tired to argue and mildly curious about pigeon dung's effectiveness. Historians still argue whether your death was hastened by medical malpractice or simply the toll of indulgence and stress. Either way, you die as you lived, surrounded by chaos, bad advice, and a remarkably tolerant spaniel. In your final hours, you ask for your brother James. You make peace. You joke to your courtiers, "Let not poor Nellie starve." Even dying, you think of the woman who made you laugh when the kingdom could not. The court weeps, not all out of love, some out of uncertainty. Because now the game changes. Your brother is Catholic, devout, grim, not one for parties or puppies. The Protestants panic, the Catholics hold their breath, and the people remember your reign not as holy, but as human. You are buried with fanfare and solemnity. The bells ring. The crowd gathers. They murmur stories, some true, some invented, all tinted with affection. Because for all your sins, your people remember your laughter. Not the treaties, not the taxes, not the wigs, just that once, when the fire faded and the ashes cooled, you gave them something they desperately needed, a reason to smile, even if it was just for a moment. Death, as it turns out, is not the end of your story. It's just the beginning of your transformation into legend, gossip, and poorly drawn woodcuts. Mainstream historical fact. After Charles II's death, his reign was romanticized as a golden era of wit, restoration, and tolerance, contrasted sharply with the religious strictness of his successor, James II. You become a symbol, a smirk in stained glass, a joke passed between aging nobles. Poets sigh over your charm, ministers curse your politics, and playwrights, those faithful miscreants, immortalize you with more glitter than accuracy. Your mistresses are recast as heroines. Your scandals gain sequins. Even your dogs are rumored to have spoken Latin. The truth, however, is buried beneath lace and laughter. Quirky tidbit. A popular ballad about you swears you once escaped Parliament by hiding in a pie. No one believes it, but everyone loves it. A pastry prince is more digestible than a man made of contradictions. Historians still argue whether your charm was genuine or simply your sharpest weapon. Did you laugh to cope or to distract? Were you England's necessary indulgence or its cunning escape route? You no longer get to answer, but your memory lingers like pipe smoke after a banquet. Statues are raised. Streets bear your name. Some schools, too, although they tend to downplay the mistresses. A century later, children in powdered wigs whisper your name in classrooms with windows that face Westminster. They write essays titled Charles the Merry Monarch and ask if it's true you once raced a chicken through the Privy Council. You did. You lost. The chicken cheated. You are remembered not just as king, but as punctuation, a semicolon between tyranny and revolution. The laugh before the storm. And as the decades pass, your reign becomes a mood, a perfume, a candlelight echo, something that flickers in the corners of royal history. Not the brightest, not the boldest, but perhaps, just perhaps, the warmest. There's a strange peace in not being alive to argue with your own legacy. You're no longer Charles Stuart, son of a beheaded king. No longer the exiled flirt or the scandal-stuffed monarch. You're just Charles II, full stop. A name people say with a wink or a wince, depending on their sense of humor. Mainstream historical fact. Charles II's reign marked the return of the monarchy after the English Civil War and Cromwell's Republican experiment, ushering in what's now called the Restoration period, known for art, science, and social revival. Now, long after the chamber pots have been scrubbed and the wine spilled in your name has dried, your ghost lingers in velvet corridors and dim-lit taverns. In some corners, you're revered. Restoration drama owes its birth to your playhouse reforms. The Royal Society still bears the royal charter you granted. Every sarcastic grin in the House of Commons owes a bit of its curve to yours. Quirky tidbit. There's an old superstition in some London pubs that leaving a coin under a tankard invokes your spirit for a lucky night. You'd be flattered, and mildly offended if the beer's cheap. Historians still argue whether your reign was frivolous indulgence or the necessary balm after a country had torn itself apart. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between powdered wigs and exhausted prayers. You leave behind no heirs by your queen, but no shortage of offspring in alleyways and palaces alike. Your blood flows through dukes, duchesses, and at least one celebrity chef. You become the bedtime story aristocrats tell their children. There once was a king who brought back the fun. They omit the plagues, the politics, the Puritan hangovers. But maybe that's fair. You weren't perfect. You weren't even particularly good. But you were there when people needed to laugh, to breathe, to live a little louder after too long whispering in the dark. And maybe, in the end, being human was enough. Now, let's ease into silence. The last echoes of courtly laughter drift beyond the palace walls. The torches fade in their sconces. Somewhere, a lute plays a tune that no one remembers the words to, but everyone still hums. The royal bedchamber settles, heavy curtains drawn against the weight of tomorrow. Your wig rests beside the candlestick. Your spaniel curls at your feet, snoring like a tiny lion. You lie still, not as a king, not as a symbol, but as a man who made the darkness a little less cold. Whatever judgments history may pass, tonight you are safe in the quiet. You are remembered. You are forgiven. And finally, you sleep,